The Doctor Who adventure games have a tendency to funnel the player along the correct path with strategically placed enemies blocking off where you're not supposed to go. If you're anything like me, being denied access to areas by enemies like this has always had a tantalizing feeling about it, where you know the path isn't technically physically blocked. It's not as decisive as an unopenable door, for example. If you could only figure out a way to slip past, you could reach whatever forbidden zone the game's creators clearly didn't want you to see. So today, we're going to make it a point to do just that. Not because there's anything worthwhile to see behind these guard enemies, just to prove they aren't the boss of us. Our toolkit consists of two main avenues for shenanigans: exploiting the enemy's AI behavior, and using glitches to mess up the game. Technically, we could go a step further and start editing the game's scripts to go wherever we want without restriction, but where's the fun in that? Needing to change the conditions of the scenario we're working with in order to succeed might as well be an admission of defeat, so I'll be avoiding using script editing in this video where possible. City of the Daleks' first enemy encounter has this pair of Daleks stopping you from getting too far down the road and escaping Trafalgar Square. There is a way to give them the slip, but it's easier if we do it slightly later. This patrolling Dalek here will throw a wrench in the technique I intend to use if I try it now, but luckily we'll get the chance to mess with these guards on their own shortly, after the patrol Dalek has left. So, saving those guards for later, the actual first guard we'll be rushing past is this one, stationed next to a pile of rubble blocking the London Underground train tracks. And in this case, it really is as easy as rushing it. The trick is to keep to the far side of the tracks, get too close to the Dalek, and it will shoot you before you can make it past. Once we get to this little nook, we're much safer than we appear to be. The collision around this rubble is more of an obstacle than it looks like it is, and the Dalek can't actually see us or hit us from here. We're effectively hiding behind an invisible corner. Unfortunately though, even though we've managed to get past the guard, there isn't anything interesting for us to do while we're here. The rubble still blocks the way fully, so we can't continue down that tantalizing tunnel. But if nothing else, it's kind of a relief to finally know for sure that getting down that tunnel never was an option. Sure, the developers were clearly trying to tell me that it wasn't an option by putting the Dalek here in the first place, but in my defense, I didn't believe them. Now it's time to go back to those two Daleks blocking the road up on the surface. We're going to come in from the side, then run around and get behind them. We get their attention from this little spot here, then run straight across their line of sight, making for this curb on their other side. It's not guaranteed to work every time, but if you're lucky, the Doctor and Amy both can get over the curb faster than the Daleks' turn, escape their field of view, and lie low until the alarm gets lowered. If you're less lucky, the Daleks will just shoot you on the way over. If you're even less lucky than that, you won't make it up onto the curb even if you do make it over here, and that's because of a very specific technical quirk of the game. Whether or not you can get on top of this curb seems to depend on your speed, or more to the point, the distance your character travels between frames. That means with the game running completely smoothly and optimally, you can't get up. But if the game is slightly laggy with a choppier frame rate, the greater distance traveled between those less frequent frames can confuse the collision detection just enough to skip over the step. This also means that you can only get up if you sprint at full speed. Your crouch walk is too slow to be able to make it. Now let me tell you, when I first pulled off this trick when I was a kid, I was over the moon excited. These were some of my very first video games, so I didn't yet have the context to pick up on what it looks like when developers block off a path to signal where the game world simply comes to an end. Quite the contrary, I saw there was more distant scenery behind the Daleks, so I was convinced I could go there. Convinced that the whole of post-apocalyptic London was just out of reach, ready to be explored if I could only escape these Daleks boxing me in. So imagine my disappointment when I finally do escape the confines of the level, only to take a few more steps further and run straight into an invisible wall. It seems the developers decided to put in a failsafe on the off chance anyone did manage to get this far, blocking off the entire width of the road. This invisible wall is a complete dropping of all pretense. They don't even try to justify it with some rubble piles or anything. It really is as simple as a solid wall of nothing, a last impenetrable line of defense stopping you from breaking the game. Well, at least they thought it was impenetrable, but that's something for a different video. So, while it is cool to be behind enemy lines like this, your personal pride is the only reward for making it back here. You do get to see them getting less concerned with polish here, though, which is kind of nifty, namely by how they let you stand in the middle of this giant blazing fire and suffer no ill effects. While we're here in this part of the game, there's a Dalek blocking off the shortest route back to the TARDIS, which is supposed to force you to take the long way round. Even if we do take the long way to reach the TARDIS, we can't take this path from the reverse side either because there's another Dalek here as well. These two Daleks effectively quarantine a little spot between them. Despite the fact that we were already there earlier in the game before these Daleks got here, I want to prove that I can still go there now, you see. So here's how we're gonna do it. We're gonna punch through their defenses at this point here, the place where the game explicitly tells you that the way is blocked and you should go around for maximum spite. And at first, it really does look like there's no way past. The Dalek's vision cone covers the whole opening at all times, and we're already close enough that getting spotted here will immediately put us in the Dalek's instant death range. The technique I intend to use for getting back here involves exploiting a mechanic where guard Daleks turn to look in your direction if you get spotted anywhere in the level. If we let ourselves get seen by those same two guards we bamboozled before, the one by the taxi will look and see, and we can then drag his vision cone to be rotated all the way out here. Then we back out of its range so the Dalek won't track us back when we return to the opening. If we get there in time, the Dalek will still be facing away from us towards our last known position, allowing us to slip behind it. We need to time it carefully when we make the final rush. Because of the way the Dalek behavior works, if we do it while the Dalek is already on alert, it will be ready for us and immediately turn around and fire. So instead, we wait for the moment its vision cone goes back down to green, but before the Dalek can return to facing forward. That is our window. It's very difficult to pull off consistently because of Amy needing to follow behind you, but it is possible for both of you to get here safely. Once you're here, you just need to wait for the alarm to be fully lowered, and then you can safely climb up. So, here we are. I like to imagine that if you showed a screenshot of this to the game's developers at the time, once they realize where in the game you are, they might be genuinely confused how you were able to manage to get up here, and that fills me with mischievous glee. Slightly further into the game, in Act 2, on Skara we pass by some Daleks guarding entrances to an interesting looking tunnel where empty travel machines under construction are carried along their production line. There are two of these guards in completely symmetrical scenarios, so whatever can be said about one can also be said about the other. There's not much to say when it comes to these Daleks. In fact, they're the easiest so far. No special techniques required, simply run up their vision cone the way we did back on the train tracks, and we can get across their vision cone faster than the Daleks' turn. Luckily for us, they have not yet grasped the concept of object permanence, so once we leave their line of sight, it often won't occur to them to look slightly to the side and follow us. It doesn't work flawlessly every time, but it's reliable enough that it shouldn't take more than a couple of attempts if you try it yourself. Now we're here, we can discover, much to our disappointment, that we can't climb into this tunnel because it's sealed off with another invisible wall. But there isn't much of interest behind here anyway, because this direction just leads out the opposite side of the tunnel. Next, let's move on to Blood of the Cybermen, the second episode of the adventure games. The first instance of these guard enemies blocking passageways is near the start of Act 2, with this cyber slave positioned just right to stop you getting through a door. With this situation as it's been given to us, it is quite simply impossible to get close to the cyber slave and live, so it becomes necessary to use glitches to break the game. Accepting that approaching this cyber slave is a sure way to end up dead, we're going to make use of an interesting glitch that allows you to keep playing the game even after you're dead. This isn't a glitch confined to Blood of the Cybermen, it's inherent in the way these games handle a game over. All you need to do is pause the game at a certain moment during death when the screen would start to fade out. In the absence of any way to keep track of exactly when that moment is, the easiest thing to do is repeatedly pause and unpause the game by spamming the escape key, so you're likely to catch the right moment by brute force. Now we can see that the fade out to black that would normally reset the game is not happening, we're just lying there, dead. The cyberslave that killed us is now completely unreactive because the developers had no need to implement any behavior for after killing the player. The game should just reset anyway, so there would be no point. So the good news is, the cyberslave is no longer active. The bad news is, neither are we. If only we had a party of two characters, where one of us could continue after the other one dies. Let's look at how this glitch works when Amy is the one who gets killed. You can see how the camera switches to her perspective, but in the moments before the fade out, you may notice that the game doesn't actually take away player controls from the Doctor when this happens. He can still move around just fine. This doesn't happen the other way around because the death simply neglects to deactivate the player movement we were already using. Therefore, for one of us to be able to keep playing, the one who dies must be whichever character we were not playing as, in this case Amy. Here you can see how the enemy which killed Amy becomes inactive and does not react to the Doctor stepping into his field of view. This shutting down of behavior only happens if it kills you when you're close enough to be standing in its instant death zone, but that Cyberslave's death zone encompasses their whole vision cone, so that distinction is irrelevant for this example. So to apply this to the Cyberslave on the door, all we need to do is sacrifice Amy as a distraction so that we as the Doctor can press on without her. Though the camera remains attached to Amy and we can't see where we're going, we can fix this by scooting Amy's fresh corpse across the floor bit by bit to push her through the doorway and into the room we want to see. The room will become accessible fairly soon later in the game. The only reason why they block it off at the beginning is because this is where the Cyberman nest is located, and the plot hasn't sent you off to find that yet. So all that's really of note in here is being able to see the nest early, but it doesn't let you skip forward in the game or anything. It just gives you an erroneous message telling you the nest is already destroyed, even though we haven't gotten to that part of the game yet. Again, the triumph of getting here only comes from the fact that it's difficult to achieve. At the start of Act 3, there is another Cyberslave stopping you from entering the final area through its exit, which would be a massive shortcut if you could get past. Except, not really, because this shortcut can only be opened by accessing a control panel from the other side of this massive gap, so there would have been no problem if they did let you out here. Having your exploration be restricted for no good reason is frustrating enough, but then they have the gall to have the Doctor think to himself as he approaches, there's no way past this guard, and it's hard not to take that as a personal challenge, you know? Shout out to Silas in the Discord server for solving how to get past this Cyberslave. There's a simple but incredibly risky way to do it, and then an alternative method that's more complicated but easier. I will be covering the easier way here because I'm simply not mechanically skilled enough to replicate the hard way to get footage for it. Here's the situation. We want to be standing out there, past the Cyberslave, but the Cyberslave's hearing radius in this narrow passage leaves us no way to get past. So, what if we sacrifice Amy like last time so the Doctor can go on without her? No such luck, because for some reason the Cyberslave doesn't react to Amy's proximity from behind, only the Doctor. The Cyberslave will target the Doctor every time, not Amy. And if the Doctor is the one to die, the glitch is useless to us. Amy is programmed to follow the Doctor, so she'll just stand there all day if the Doctor is not moving, for instance, if he's dead. So, secondary objective, we need to be playing as Amy, so she can be the one to go on ahead after the Doctor is dead. There is a way to give player controls to Amy, and to do that, we need to get the game to save while she is dead. So, tertiary objective, we perform the death glitch on Amy with the next available enemy that will react to her, and now, quaternary objective, scoot her corpse along until we reach this ladder, which is the next save point. Now that the game has saved with Amy in this state, quitting and reloading will bring her back to life, except now both she and the Doctor respond to player controls at the same time. This is good. Now we can send Amy out onto the walkway, but to do this, we've had to go a fair distance away from where we started, so now we must head back to where the guard is. Unfortunately, the game doesn't let us simply go back up the ladder we just climbed down, so it looks like our quinary objective is to take the long way back up the sloping tunnels while playing as the Doctor and Amy simultaneously. Our next roadblock, however, is that the little alcoves you need to hide in to evade the Cyberslaves have special triggers in them that give Amy instructions to hide in there with you, which have the unfortunate side effect of resetting her AI back to normal, so we can't use them at all if we want to retain this state of double control we have going. So, it looks like now we have a centenary objective of figuring out how to get past these Cyberslaves in these narrow hallways without the use of the only blind spots available. Nice. To achieve this, our septenary objective becomes performing the death glitch again, this time on the Doctor, so we don't need to worry about him being killed anymore. Now Amy can scoot his corpse all the way back up the tunnels. She can use the alcoves just fine, it's specifically the Doctor entering them that resets her AI. That doesn't mean it's easy though. Now comes the part where we spend a good 20 minutes sliding the dead Doctor inch by inch all the way back up these tunnels, while still needing to avoid the Cyberslaves in here with us. This is far more punishing than anything these games will ever ask of you playing them normally, but as long as you're careful and don't get impatient, it is a fairly simple affair. Eventually, we make it back to the start of the area with that guard, except this time Amy has player controls, which was the whole point of doing all this. We can make good use of how she doesn't alert the Cyberslave with proximity. With Amy, we only need to worry about the vision cone, not the hearing radius, and that makes it much more feasible to get past. We just need to time our rush for when it's sweeping the other way and go for it, knowing we're looking at 20 more minutes of setup before we can make another attempt if we fail. In my successful attempt, I just barely scraped through in what is quite literally as close a shave as is possible. You can see how the cyber slave seems to have a bit of a false alarm where their vision cone turns yellow for only a moment, but they don't react. That means I just barely grazed the vision cone so lightly that I was back out of it again before it could fully register, which happens in the span of a tenth of a second. This warm-up period is so brief that it's taken looking at the code to even realize there was such a thing. If I had been touching that vision cone for any longer than a tenth of a second, it would have been an instant game over. So after all that, we can finally make it out onto the walkway. The camera is still attached to the doctor back where we left him, but at this point I'll take what I can get. Toward the end of Blood of the Cybermen, we have a superficially similar situation with a Cyberman guarding another doorway. That is the way to the Cyberman's control room, a space only used in cutscenes and not accessible in normal gameplay. But this time, I'm going to have to admit defeat and say this looks pretty impossible to get past. To glitch your way into that room, you'd need to go so far out of your way that it can no longer be reasonably considered to be getting past this guard. Taking a close look at that control room is better suited to a hypothetical future video about cutscene-only areas, but if you're curious, there is already a video of it up on this channel. At first, it might not be so obvious what makes this encounter any more difficult than what we've done so far, especially after what we just went through back in the ice tunnels. But none of the techniques I've used up to this point are applicable here. I can't drag the Cyberman's line of sight away to make an opening, because this is a corridor, not an open space. Amy isn't here for this part, meaning we can't do anything with the death glitch either. We can't even rush it because of the confined space. Unlike those Dalek encounters, the narrow space of this corridor will force us too close to the Cyberman, close enough to enter their instant death range. But never say never, right? These games have some weird and obscure glitches, I'm sure we haven't found them all, so perhaps there's some way to deactivate stealth mode and make us invisible to the Cyberman. That kind of glitch isn't unheard of. Well, unfortunately, the real thing that makes this truly impossible is that the Cyberman themselves isn't even the problem. If they were completely removed from the game, this room would still be blocked, because there is a completely redundant wrong way trigger placed just past where the Cyberman is standing. If you played these games, no doubt you've encountered these, tiny little cutscenes that take away player control just long enough to turn you around and point you in the right direction. Unlike with enemy AI, there isn't any wiggle room to trick or bamboozle them, most of the time, so for all intents and purposes they're functionally the same thing as an invisible wall. If you repeatedly fling yourself at the Cyberman, there's a chance you'll get far enough through the doorway to get stopped by this second line of defense, at which point the Cyberman will kill you before the game even gives player control back. And curiously enough, there's actually a second variant of the Doctor's internal monologue for this, which only triggers if you try to go back in a second time after being turned away once already. This is wildly pointless, since there's no chance in a million years that you'd survive triggering this once to be able to go back in for seconds. So my proposition is that we're looking at some unused content here. I think originally, this Cyberman wasn't here, and the developers just blocked the way back into the control room using the wrong way trigger. Then, they decided it would be more immersive to have a clear and obvious reason why you can't go back inside, rather than arbitrarily turning you away at the door. Once they put the Cyberman here, the wrong way trigger became redundant, but the developers had no reason to go out of their way to remove it either. All that is to say, I'm going to give the game a victory on this one. It has bested me. I cannot get past this guard. Episodes 3 and 4 of the adventure games don't have any examples of these guard enemies placed in front of otherwise open passageways, so all that's left to talk about is the fifth and final game, the Gunpowder Plot. But that's something for another day. Asking whether or not you can get past any particular enemy in that game is kind of a fundamentally different question. Or rather, the answer is always yes, so you'd need to ask something more specific. The Gunpowder Plot has a single, all-powerful no-clip glitch that can get you pretty much anywhere you want to go. The collision detection in that game is more like collision suggestion. That one glitch will inevitably dominate any discussion about getting into weird places, and it is fascinating, but it's a whole new can of worms, one best opened another time in its own dedicated video.